my entitled niece told me, "You're only invited because you pay for everything." While holding the purse I bought her, her dad laughed, agreeing with her. They had no idea I was about to enact the ultimate revenge that would change everything. I'm Daniel, 45 male, and after more than a decade of being treated like a walking, talking bank account, I finally realized my family's love came with a price I was no longer willing to pay. The smooth, weighted linen of the napkin felt cool against my fingers as I folded it into a neat square on my lap. Around me, the low hum of the upscale downtown restaurant was a symphony of clinking glasses, muted conversations, and the distant sizzle from the open kitchen. It was the kind of place I'd chosen for countless special occasions, a place where the bill at the end of the night would make most people's eyes water. For me, it had become just another Tuesday, another family expense. Tonight's occasion was my niece Chloe's 14th birthday. Across the table, she was a whirlwind of teenage energy, her face illuminated by the glow of her brand new smartphone. A gift from me, naturally. Next to her, my sister Laura wore a strained but polite smile, the kind she always wore when caught between her gratitude for my generosity and her reluctance to reign in her family. And at the head of the table, holding court like a king in a kingdom he hadn't built, was her husband, Mark. He was sipping a glass of 20-year-old single malt scotch, a drink he'd ordered with the casual confidence of a man who has never had to check the price. This was my family, or, more accurately, this was the role I played within my family. I was the benefactor, the provider, the ever-reliable safety net. It was a role that had been cast for me so long ago, I could barely remember the audition. It began subtly, as these things always do. Our parents passed away when I was 25, and Laura was just 22. I had just sold my first piece of software for a modest but life-changing sum, and Laura was still finding her feet, dating a charismatic but ambitionless man named Mark. I felt a profound sense of responsibility for her. She was my little sister, and my inheritance, combined with my burgeoning career in tech, meant I was in a position to help. My first major act was putting the down payment on their first little house. "It's just to get you started," I'd told them, waving off their effusive thanks. "Consider it a gift from Mom and Dad. Through me." Mark had clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes gleaming. "You're a lifesaver, Dan, a true brother." That was the first brick in the foundation of dependency. Over the years, more were laid. When Mark was laid off from his sales job, the first of many times I covered their mortgage for 6 months. "Just until I get back on my feet," he'd assured me, his tone sincere. He never did get back on his feet. Not really. He drifted from one promising venture to another, each one requiring a small investment from me to get off the ground, and each one quietly fizzling out within a year. Laura took a part-time job as a receptionist, but her income was a drop in the ocean. Of their expenses, they had developed a taste for a lifestyle that I, inadvertently, was bankrolling. Their small starter house was sold, and I helped with a deposit on a much larger one in a better school district. "It's for Chloe's future," Laura had explained, her voice soft and pleading. How could I say no to my niece's future? So, I paid for the private school tuition because the public schools weren't challenging enough for Chloe. I paid for the European vacations because it was important for Chloe to be culturally enriched. I paid for their cars, their clothes, their groceries delivered from high-end organic markets. My name was on the family phone plan, the premium cable subscription, and a dozen other monthly debits that bled from my accounts into theirs. I told myself it was what family did. I had more than I needed, and they were my only real family left. The loneliness of my large, quiet house was a powerful motivator. The sound of their laughter, even if I was just visiting for dinner, felt like a fair trade for a few $1,000s here and there. I convinced myself that their gratitude was genuine, just poorly expressed. But there were moments, small cracks in the facade, that gave me pause. I remember Chloe's 10th birthday. I had spent weeks trying to find a first edition copy of her favorite book series, finally tracking one down through a collector in England. I was so excited to give it to her. She opened the carefully wrapped package, glanced at the old leather-bound book, and gave a small, polite, "Oh, thanks, Uncle Dan." Then she turned to the mountain of other gifts, her eyes scanning for the telltale logos of popular tech brands and designer labels later. I saw the book left behind on a side table, forgotten. Mark had picked it up, flipped through it, and said, "You know, Dan, you could have just gotten her the iPad she wanted. Probably would have been cheaper, too." He'd meant it as a joke, but it stung. Another time, I overheard Laura on the phone with a friend. It wasn't Daniel invited us, or Daniel is sharing his place with us. It was just a statement of fact, as if my property was a communal asset. I was not a person in the story. I was a setting. These incidents were like pebbles in my shoe. Annoying, uncomfortable, but easy enough to shake out and ignore. I kept telling myself I was being too sensitive. I kept focusing on the good moments, the Christmas mornings, the "I love you, Uncle Dan" messages, the family portraits, where we all looked so happy. I chose to believe the curated version of our family, not the one that whispered to me in the quiet moments of doubt. Tonight, sitting in this ludicrously expensive restaurant, the weight of all those pebbles felt different. It was no longer a minor annoyance. It was a heavy, grinding stone, wearing away the last of my illusions. I watched Chloe scroll through her phone, occasionally pausing to take a selfie, pouting her lips in a way she'd learned from social media influencers. She hadn't looked me in the eye since I'd handed her the small, elegantly wrapped box sitting beside her plate. I already knew what was about to happen. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. The main course arrived: seared scallops for Laura, a massive porterhouse steak for Mark, a truffle pasta dish for Chloe, and a simple grilled fish for me. As the waiter departed, Chloe finally set down her phone, her attention drawn to the box. "Aren't you going to open it, sweetie?" Laura prompted gently. Chloe sighed, a theatrical sound of teenage boredom, and picked up the gift. She tore the paper with a practiced lack of care. Inside, nestled in soft tissue paper, was a small black designer handbag. It was a popular, trendy brand, the kind of thing her favorite celebrities were often photographed with. It had cost more than my first car. She pulled it out, her expression unreadable. She didn't smile. She didn't gasp. She simply examined it, turning it over in her hands, checking the stitching, feeling the texture of the leather. It was not the reaction of a child receiving a gift. It was the assessment of an appraiser valuing an asset. Finally, she looked up, not at me, but at a friend she was clearly texting under the table. She held up the purse to be in the frame of her phone's camera for a picture. And then, with a snort that cut through the restaurant's genteel hum, she typed something and chuckled. "What is it, sweetie?" Mark asked, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Show your mom." Chloe rolled her eyes and tossed the purse onto the empty chair beside her. "It's fine," she said, her voice dripping with the casual cruelty only a 14-year-old can master. She glanced at her friend, who had just arrived with her parents at another table across the room, and waved. The friend waved back. Wide at the sight of the purse, Chloe's friend walked over, a girl with equally expensive-looking highlights in her hair. "Oh my God, Chloe, is that the new Valencia?" Chloe picked it up again, a smirk finally gracing her lips as she showed it off to her audience. "Yep, Uncle Dan got it for me." She then leaned in conspiratorially towards her friend, but her whisper was loud enough for our entire table to hear. "I mean, it's the least he can do. It's not like he has his own family to spend money on. Besides," she added with a final, dismissive snort, "you know he's only invited to things like this because he pays for everything." The words hung in the air, sharp and clear and monstrous. The friend giggled uncomfortably. Laura's face went white, her smile frozen in a silent gasp. My heart, which had been bracing for impact, felt nothing at all. There was no shock, no pain, just a profound, hollow calm. The final illusion had just been shattered, and its absence was blessedly quiet. The friend scurried back to her table. Laura opened her mouth to say something, to scold, to apologize. But before she could, Mark let out a short, hearty laugh. He took a large gulp of his scotch, gesturing at me with the glass. "Well," he chuckled, his voice full of amusement, "she's not wrong. He knows his role." He said it with a wink, as if we were all in on the same joke. A joke where I was the punchline. Laura stared at her husband, horrified. "Mark," she hissed, but I didn't look at her. I didn't look at Mark. I didn't look at my niece, who was now oblivious again, admiring her reflection in the back of a spoon. I simply lifted my own glass of water to my lips and took a long, slow sip. The cold liquid was tasteless, cleansing. In that single silent moment, a decade of self-deception washed away. He knows his role. Yes, I thought. I did. And I also knew, with absolute unshakable certainty, that my performance was over. The show was closing tonight. The silence that followed Mark's pronouncement was thick and suffocating. It was broken only by the faint clink of Chloe's spoon against her teeth as she scraped the last of the truffle sauce from her bowl. She was utterly oblivious, lost. In her own world of flavors and future social media posts, for her, the conversation was over, a minor distraction from the main event of her birthday dinner. For the rest of us, the world had tilted on its axis. Laura's face was a mask of pale, frozen horror. Her eyes, wide and pleading, darted towards me. I could see the frantic thoughts swirling behind them. Say something, Dan. Laugh it off. Tell him he's crossed a line. Don't just sit there. Please, don't let this be real. Her entire body was tense, her hands clenched in her lap beneath the table. She was a spectator at a crash scene, praying the victims would just get up and walk. Away unscathed, Mark, however, was the picture of unconcerned satisfaction. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, a smug grin playing on his lips. He truly believed he had made a clever, witty observation. In his mind, he hadn't insulted me. He had simply stated the terms of our arrangement, an arrangement he found immensely beneficial and amusing. He saw no malice in his words because, to him, our dynamic wasn't built on love or respect. It was a transaction, and he was proud of the deal he'd struck. I held their gazes for a moment, first Laura's panicked stare, then Mark's self-satisfied smirk. I offered them nothing in return. No anger, no hurt, no argument. I simply set my glass of water down with a soft, deliberate click. The emotional part of my brain, the part that would normally feel the sting of betrayal, seemed to have been switched off. In its place was a cold, efficient clarity. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. The protagonist had just been handed the script for the final scene, and everything suddenly made perfect logical sense. The words echoed in the quiet space of my mind. He knows his role. The role of the walking wallet. The role of the emotional placeholder. The role of the man who buys his ticket to family events with wire transfers and credit card payments. The role was demeaning, hollow, and utterly and the most damning part was that I had willingly played it for years. I had accepted the bit parts of affection they'd thrown my way as if they were a fair wage. I had mistaken their dependence for love. Chloe's comment was the spark, but Mark's laugh was the explosion. A child can be cruel out of ignorance, parroting things she's heard without understanding their weight. But a grown man's laughter, his smug confirmation, that was a confession. He was openly admitting to seeing me, his brother-in-law, the man who kept a roof over his head, as a fool. A useful, necessary fool. I picked up my fork and knife and cut a small piece of the grilled sea bass on my plate. I brought it to my mouth and chewed slowly, methodically. The fish was perfectly cooked, flaky, and light, but it tasted of nothing. The flavors of the lemon and herbs were gone, replaced by the metallic taste of finality. Chloe, didn't mean it like that. Laura finally stammered, her voice a fragile whisper. It was the same line she always used, the default apology for 100 smaller slights over the years. She's just a kid. He's just joking. They don't mean it. I think she meant it exactly like that, I said, my voice even and calm. I didn't. Look at her. I kept my eyes on my plate, and I think Mark agrees with her. Mark's grin faltered for a second. He hadn't expected a direct response, especially not one delivered with such unnerving tranquility. He was used to me being a gentle giant, absorbing his passive-aggressive jabs with a sad smile or a quiet change of subject. This quiet, direct confrontation was not in his playbook. "Hey, come on now," he said, forcing a jovial tone. "It was a joke, Dan. Don't be so sensitive. We love having you here. You know that. We love having you here, not we love you." The semantics were subtle but screamingly loud. They loved the benefits of my presence. They loved the open tab. I tipped another bite of fish. I sipped my water. I could feel Laura's anxiety radiating across the table. She was desperate for me to accept the flimsy olive branch, to reset the scene and allow us all to go back to pretending. The cost of that pretense was my dignity, but it was a price she was clearly hoping I would continue to pay to maintain her comfort. The waiter returned. his professional smile unwavering. "Is everything to your satisfaction this evening?" he asked. "It's wonderful, thank you," I replied, giving him a small, genuine smile. It was the first genuine expression I'd shown all night. He was a professional doing his job. I could respect that. The rest of the meal passed in a state of suspended animation. Mark tried to launch into a story about a neighbor's ridiculous new lawn ornament. Laura tried to ask Chloe about school, but the energy was gone. My silence was a vacuum, sucking the air out of their forced cheerfulness. I finished my meal, laid my utensils neatly across the plate, and sat back. Chloe, finally sensing the shift in the atmosphere, looked up from her phone. "What?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "Why is everyone so quiet?" "It's nothing, sweetie," Laura said quickly. "Finish up your pasta." When the waiter came to clear the plates, he asked about dessert. "Yes," Chloe exclaimed, her mood instantly lifting. "Can I get the chocolate lava cake and one of those fancy milkshakes?" "Of course," the waiter said, turning to the rest of us. "Nothing for me, thank you," I said. "Just the check, please." Mark's eyes widened slightly. My departure from the script was becoming more pronounced. Usually, I would insist on everyone having dessert and coffee, prolonging the evening. Cutting it short was a breach of protocol. "What's the rush?" Mark asked. "The night is young. I have an early start tomorrow," I lied smoothly. "Lots to do." Check arrived in a small leather folio. As always, the waiter placed it in the center of the table, a polite gesture of ambiguity. And as always, Mark made no move toward it. He looked at it, then looked at me, his expression expectant. It was my cue. This was my scene. This was my role. I reached out, took the folio, and opened it. The number at the bottom was, as expected, astronomical. It represented more than Laura earned in 2 months of part-time work. I pulled my wallet out, but instead of the familiar black credit card that had funded their lives for years, I selected a different one, my personal debit card, linked to a smaller account I used for my own daily expenses. I slid it into the folio and handed it back to the waiter. The action was small, but it felt monumental. It was the first financial decision I had made in their presence in a long time that was purely for me. It was the beginning of the separation. As we stood to leave, the valet tickets were handed over. Mine, for my modest sedan. Theirs, for the luxury SUV I had leased for them. Outside, the night air was cool. Laura hovered near me, her face etched with worry. "Are you okay, Dan?" she asked, her voice low. "I'm fine, Laura," I said, my tone giving nothing away. "I'm so sorry about what Chloe said, and Mark. He's an idiot." "Yes," I agreed. "He is." My simple, unadorned agreement seemed to startle her more than an angry outburst would have. She was expecting me to soothe her, to say, "It's okay, don't worry about it." I did not. Chloe ran over, holding the designer purse. "Thanks for the bag, Uncle Dan," she said, the words sounding rehearsed, likely prompted by Laura. There was no warmth in them. "You're welcome, Chloe," I said. I looked at the purse, then at her. "I hope you enjoy it. It's the last one." She frowned. Confused, the last what? The last bag. "Yes," I said. Our cars arrived. I gave the valet a generous tip. I turned to Laura and gave her a brief, one-armed hug. It was stiff and awkward. "Get home safe," I said. It sounded like a dismissal. I got into my car and closed the door, the sound sealing me in my own quiet world. I didn't look back as I pulled out of the driveway. I didn't need to. I could already picture them, Mark annoyed that the evening ended early, Laura wringing her hands with worry, Chloe already texting her friends a picture of her new purse. The uncle who bought it already forgotten. The final straw hadn't been a single piece of hay. It had been the whole bale, and as I drove into the night, I didn't feel anger or sadness anymore. I felt light. I felt free. I had a lot of work to do, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I was excited for the morning. The drive home was quiet. I left the car radio off, preferring the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic sweep of the headlights on the dark asphalt. My mind, which should have been a chaotic storm of anger and hurt, was instead a place of absolute crystalline calm. The decision had been made in that silent moment at the dinner table, and all that remained was the execution. There was no debate, No hesitation. There was only a long, overdue task list. My house felt cavernous when I walked in. The echo of my footsteps on the hardwood floors of the foyer usually amplified my loneliness. Tonight, it sounded like potential. It was the sound of a space being cleared out. I didn't bother turning on all the lights. I walked through the dim, familiar rooms to my home office, a place that had always been my sanctuary and the engine room of my success. It was here that I had built the wealth that had become my family's crutch. It seemed fitting that it would also be the place where I dismantled the system I had created. I sat down in my large leather chair, the one that had supported me through 1,000-hour work weeks and multi-million-dollar deals. I powered on my dual monitors, and the soft blue light illuminated my face. For a moment, I just sat there, looking at the clean, organized desktop of my computer. Then, I opened a new spreadsheet. I titled it, simply, Family. My first action was the most direct. I logged into my primary online banking portal. The screen was familiar, a dashboard of my financial life. I navigated to the Bill Pay section. A long list of automatic payments was scheduled for the first of the month, just a few days away. At the top of the list was Mortgage 245 Sunny Meadow Lane. The address of the oversized house they lived in, the house I had never co-signed for, but whose monthly payment I had been making for the last 8 years. I clicked on the payment, and a dialog box appeared. Edit, skip, delete. I clicked delete. A confirmation popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently delete this scheduled payment? I clicked yes. Their SUV, another automatic payment, another click, another confirmation. This one was under my name. I opened a new tab and logged into the carrier's website. I didn't have to cancel the whole plan, just modify it. I saw the 4 numbers listed, mine, Laura's, Mark's, and Chloe's. With 3 precise clicks, I removed their lines from my account. A message informed me that the numbers would be deactivated within the hour unless they were transferred to a new account holder. That was their problem now. My own line remained solitary and secure. Changes saved dot. Then came the credit cards. I was the primary holder on a high-limit card that had a set of authorized users, Laura and Mark. I had given it to them years ago for emergencies. It had quickly become their card for groceries, for gas, for dinners out, for clothes, for everything. I opened the credit cards app on my phone. Under the Manage Users section, their names were listed right below mine. Next to each name was a small red button that said, Remove. I pressed it. For Laura, are you sure this action is irreversible? The plastic in their wallets was now just that plastic. The list went on. School tuition payments, which were paid by semester. The streaming service bundle with all the premium channels. Cancel subscription. The monthly allowance I transferred to Laura's personal bank account. A top-up, so she never had to worry about small expenses. Delete recurring transfer. Each click was a quiet declaration of independence. It wasn't done in anger. It felt more like pruning a dead branch from a tree. The act wasn't malicious. It was necessary for the health of the main trunk. With every canceled payment, I felt a weight I hadn't even consciously realized I was carrying begin to lift. It was the weight of expectation, of obligation, of unspoken resentment. After nearly an hour, the digital cleansing was complete. The most important part was yet to come. This couldn't be a silent act. A silent act could be misconstrued as a mistake, a technical glitch, a temporary problem. My decision needed to be communicated, not with emotion, but with undeniable, irrefutable fact. I went back to the spreadsheet I'd opened. I created 2 columns, date, item, and cost. I began to work my way backward through my financial history. Years ago, showing the massive wire transfer for the down payment on their current house, I entered the date, down payment to 45 Sunny Meadow Lane, and the exact amount. Then I calculated the total of the 96 mortgage payments I had made since. The number was staggering. I added it as a new line item. I found the records for the 2 luxury cars I had leased for them over the past 6 years. I added the total lease payments to the list, the private school tuition for Chloe starting in middle school, 6 years of payments. I added the sum. The family vacations, a week at a Disney resort, 10 days in Italy, a cruise to the Caribbean. I had the credit card statements saved in my digital files. Small things, the groceries, the dinners, the clothes. It would be petty and impossible to calculate. I focused only on the life-altering major expenses that had shaped their entire existence for the last decade, the things they had come to see as their birthright. As I populated the spreadsheet, the number in the total cell at the bottom grew at an alarming rate. It climbed past 6 figures, then past 500,000, and continued to ascend. The final number was shocking, even to me. I had known abstractly that I was spending a lot, but seeing it all laid out, line by line, in stark black and white, was devastating. It was the documented cost of my own denial. I formatted the spreadsheet into a clean, professional-looking invoice. I used a simple, elegant font. At the top, I wrote, "Summary of Financial Support 201 for 2024. For Laura and Mark, I made sure the final total at the bottom was in a large, bold font, impossible to ignore. Below the grand total, I typed a single sentence. I thought about the wording for a long time. I didn't want it to be angry or accusatory. I wanted it to be final. All accounts are now closed. Consider this debt forgiven and my role fulfilled. Goodbye." I printed the document. The single sheet of paper that emerged from the printer felt heavier than it should. It was a tangible record of my foolishness, but also the key to my freedom. I folded it neatly and slid it into a simple white business envelope. I didn't write a name on the outside. They would know who it was from. My last act of the night was to go to the guest room, a room that Laura, Mark, and Chloe had used countless times over the years. Hanging in the closet was a spare key to their house, which they had given me for emergencies. My own emergencies, of course, had always been a matter for me to handle alone. I took the key. The streets were empty. Now the world asleep. I parked a block away from their house and walked down the quiet, tree-lined street. Their house was dark, except for a single light on in an upstairs window, Chloe's room. I pictured her in there, scrolling on her phone, bathed in the blue light, the new designer purse sitting on her desk like a trophy from a game she didn't even know she had just lost. I walked silently up their driveway, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. I could hear the hum of the oversized refrigerator I had bought them 2 years ago. On the granite island, in the center of their cavernous kitchen, I placed the white envelope, propping it up against a ridiculously expensive fruit bowl that was completely empty. It looked so small and innocent there in the dark, a single white rectangle in the center of their lives. I let myself out, locking the door behind me. As I walked away, I tossed their house key into the darkness of a neighbor's well-manicured hedge. I would not be coming back. The severance was complete. I didn't go home. My own house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a sterile waiting room. I knew what was coming, and I had no desire to sit within my own 4 walls, watching the clock. Instead, I drove north, chasing the pre-dawn glow that was beginning to soften the eastern horizon. I had no destination in mind, just a deep-seated need for motion, for distance by the time the sun had fully risen, casting a warm, golden light over the highway. I found a small, unassuming town nestled in a river. Valiant checked into a modest motel with a clean room and a surprisingly comfortable bed. I paid in cash. I needed to be a witness to the fallout. It felt like a necessary part of the process, like watching the controlled demolition of a building you had spent years constructing. The first message arrived at 7:45. The message, the casual entitlement, the immediate assumption that I had made a mistake, was breathtaking. I felt a flicker of something, not anger, but a kind of weary validation. I had made the right choice. I didn't reply. The second message came 20 minutes later, this time from Laura. Her text had a frantic edge. "Laura, morning. Hope you're not mad about last night. I'm at the grocery store and my card was declined. The one you gave us. It's so embarrassing. Can you call them and see what's wrong?" I could picture her perfectly, standing at the checkout. A full cart of overpriced organic foods, her face flushed with a mixture of confusion and humiliation. The cashier looking at her with pity or annoyance. The people in line behind her shifting, impatiently. A scenario that was, until today, completely alien to her. I imagined her trying her own debit card, knowing it would have insufficient funds for a cart of that size. I set the phone down. An hour passed. Then my phone began to vibrate, continuously. A call from Mark. I silenced it. A second later, a text from him. "Mark, Dan." What the hell is going on? Laura's card got declined. Chloe's phone is off. The bank just sent me an alert for a failed mortgage payment. Pick up your phone now. The tone was pure Mark. Aggressive, demanding, devoid of any pleasantries. He wasn't asking, he was commanding. He still believed he had that power over me. The lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. I let his call go to voicemail again. Then there was a lull, a quiet period of about 30 minutes. This, I knew, was the moment. This was the time they would be searching the house for clues, talking to each other, their confusion mounting into panic. It was during this lull that one of them would walk into the kitchen and see it. The single white envelope sitting on the granite island. At 9:32 a.m., my phone lit up with a call from Laura. I ignored it. A moment later, a text appeared. It was one word, .Laura. Daniel, just my name. The formality of it sent a chill down my spine. The fun and games were over. They had found the envelope. They had opened it. They had read it. I imagined the scene with vivid clarity. Laura, her hands trembling as she read the itemized list, Mark snatching it from her, his face turning from red with anger to sheet white with shock as his eyes scanned the line items, the dates, the costs. The staggering number at the bottom, the cold final sentence. They would have looked at each other. The full reality of their situation crashing down on them like a tidal wave. This wasn't a technical glitch. This wasn't me being sensitive after a bad joke. This was a calculated, systematic dismantling of their entire existence. The house, the car, the school, the money. It was all built on a foundation of my money, a foundation that had just been vaporized. They didn't just find an invoice. They found their own eviction notice from the life they knew. The reason they went pale wasn't just about the money. It was the sudden, terrifying confrontation with the truth of their dependency. They had been exposed not to the world, but to themselves. A new text from Laura appeared. Laura, please call me. Daniel, please. We need to talk about this. This is a mistake. This is insane. Mistake. Insane. The words of someone who refuses to accept a consequence. The insanity to me was letting it go on for as long as I had. Then came the barrage from Mark, a stream of consciousness typed out in a furious, clumsy rage. Mark, what is this? What the hell is this paper? Is this a joke? After everything we've been through, you're going to throw our family away over a stupid comment from a kid. Mark, you can't do this. The mortgage, the car, you can't just stop. That's not how it works. Mark, you are a selfish bastard. You have all this money, and you get off on holding it over our heads. We are your family, Mark. You better fix this, Dan. I swear to God you better fix this by the end of the day. I read his threats with a strange sense of detachment. It was like reading the rantings of a stranger. The man who had laughed at me just last night, who had smugly defined my role, was now desperately trying to shove me back into that box. His words had no power over me anymore. They were just angry noise, the last gasps of a dying parasite. The most telling message came late in the afternoon, after hours of silence. It was from Chloe again. Her tone had changed from annoyed to bewildered and scared. Chloe, Mom is crying, Dad is yelling. They're talking about having to sell the house. What did you do? Why are you doing this to us? What did you do? The question hung there, a perfect encapsulation of their collective mindset. In her world, this was something I was actively doing to them, not a consequence of their own actions. The decade of taking, the entitlement, the disrespecting of that factored into her equation. There was only my action and their suffering. That night, in my quiet motel room, I ordered a pizza and watched an old movie. I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was raging 100 miles away, but here there was only calm. I had expected to feel guilt or sadness or even a vindictive pleasure. I felt none of those things. I just felt quiet. The background noise of my life, the constant hum of my sister's family's needs, had been switched off. The silence was vast and beautiful. I slept for 10 hours, a deep, uninterrupted sleep I hadn't experienced in years. When I woke up, I felt rested. I felt new. I looked at my phone. There were dozens more missed calls and texts, pleading ones, from Laura, promising they would change, that they would make it up to me, abusive ones from Mark, calling me every name he could think of, confused and angry ones from Chloe. I made a decision. I selected Laura's contact, then Mark's, then Chloe's, and for each one, I pressed the block contact button. The stream of messages stopped. The silence was now absolute. The demolition was complete. Now, it was time to start rebuilding. The first few days of my newfound freedom were strange. My life had been structured around my work and their needs for so long that their absence created a vacuum. I woke up in my motel room with no emails to answer about a sudden emergency car repair, no texts requesting a transfer for a school field trip. The silence was both liberating and disorienting, like an astronaut learning to walk in normal gravity again. I decided to stay away. Going back to my empty house felt wrong, like returning to the scene of a crime. I needed a clean break, not just from them, but from the version of myself who had enabled them. I drove west, towards the coast. I found a small cottage for rent, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The owner was an elderly woman who asked no questions beyond whether I minded the sound of the foghorn at night. I told her I would love it. Here, the rhythm of my life slowed to the ebb and flow of the tide. I spent my mornings walking on the cold, wind-swept beach, watching the waves crash against the rocks. The raw, untamable power of the ocean felt like a kindred spirit. It answered to no one. It followed its own ancient rules. For the first time, I felt like I could do the same. During these walks, my mind would often drift back, not with regret, but with a kind of analytical curiosity. I tried to pinpoint the exact moment I had ceded control, the point where my generosity curdled into obligation. It wasn't one moment, but 1,000 small concessions. It was saying yes when I should have said, let's discuss it. It was accepting a thank you when the situation demanded a genuine show of gratitude. It was funding a lifestyle for them that I didn't even live myself. My own life was simple: a comfortable house, a reliable car, quiet hobbies. I didn't own designer clothes or crave lavish vacations. I had been subsidizing a dream that wasn't even my own. I thought a lot about our parents and the promise I had made to myself to look after Laura. I realized I had confused looking after her with infantilizing her. I hadn't given her support. I had given her a gilded cage where she never had to face the consequences of her or her husband's choices. I hadn't been helping her grow. I had been stunting her. And Mark, I had allowed Mark to become the man he was. My endless supply of money had been the soil in which his arrogance and laziness had flourished. Without it, who would he be? I was about to find out. A week into my coastal retreat, I allowed myself to do something I hadn't done in years. I reconnected with an old friend. Peter was my business partner from my first startup. We had been inseparable in our 20s, but had drifted apart as my family obligations consumed more of my time and emotional energy. I called him out of the blue. Daniel, is that really you? He'd said, his voice full of surprised warmth. I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. Not quite, I said, smiling, just crawling back on. We talked for 2 hours. I told him everything, the whole sordid 15-year history. I expected him to be shocked, but he wasn't. Honestly, man, I'm not surprised, he said, his voice gentle. I saw it starting back then. Hot dog scheme? And you did it, even though we both knew it was a dog, so to speak. I did remember. I'd lost $20,000 on that venture. I could never understand why you let them treat you like that, Peter continued. You're one of the smartest guys I know. But with them, it was like you turned off your brain. But listen, what matters is you woke up. So, what's next for you? What's next? The question thrilled me. For years, what's next had always been about them. The next mortgage payment, the next tuition bill, the next manufactured crisis. Now, the future was a blank page. I have no idea, I admitted, and it feels fantastic. The conversation with Peter was a turning point. It reminded me that there was a world beyond the toxic bubble I had lived in. A world with people who knew me before I became the bank of Uncle Dan. They saw me not as a role, but as a person. The days turned into weeks. I read books. I learned to cook something other than my 3 standard meals. I even bought a second-hand surfboard and spent hours failing spectacularly in the churning white water, laughing at my own incompetence. I was feeling things I hadn't felt in a decade. Curiosity, spontaneity, joy. The weight on my shoulders was gone, and I felt taller, lighter. One evening, my curiosity got the better of me. I unblocked their numbers. I didn't do it to engage, but to observe. I needed one last data point to close the experiment. It didn't take long. A few hours later, a long, rambling email from Laura appeared in my inbox. The tone was completely different from her earlier frantic texts. This was the result of weeks of desperation and, perhaps, a sliver of forced introspection. It began with a lengthy, overwrought apology for everything, for Chloe's words, for Mark's laughter, for her own weakness. She wrote about how much she had always loved me, how she had always been so grateful, but had a hard time showing it. It was a beautiful, well-crafted performance of contrition. Then the tone shifted. The second half of the email was about the consequences. The bank was starting foreclosure proceedings on the house. The SUV had been repossessed from their driveway. In the middle of the night, Chloe was miserable. She had been forced to enroll in the local public high school and hated it. She was being bullied because she no longer had the right clothes or the newest phone. "Mark is trying," she wrote. "He's been looking for a job, but it's hard. No one appreciates his experience." The email ended with a desperate plea. "I know. We don't deserve it, Daniel, but I am begging you, not for the house or the car, just a little bit, to get us through, to help us find an apartment. For Chloe's sake, please don't punish her because of our mistakes. I am on my knees. I'm so sorry. We can be a family again. A real one this time." I read the email twice. The old me, the Danube of a month ago, would have caved. The mention of Chloe being punished, the image of my sister on her knees, would have shattered my resolve. I would have wired the money, and the cycle would have started all over again. But I was not the old me. I could now see the email for what it was, a masterclass in manipulation. It was designed to trigger every one of my old guilt reflexes. For Chloe's sake, don't punish the child. We can be a family again. I knew what I had to do. My response had to be as final and unequivocal as the printed invoice. I had left on their table. I let Laura's email sit in my inbox for a full day. I didn't want to respond with the residual emotion of having just read it. I needed my reply too. Be born from the new .com center I had found within myself, I went for a long walk on the beach, letting the salty wind clear my head. I thought about her words, dissecting them not as a wounded brother, but as a detached observer. Her apology was for the incident, the single dinner that had pushed me over the edge. It wasn't for the decade of entitlement that led to it. She was sorry for the final straw, but not for the mountain of hay she had helped pile onto my back. Her focus was on the symptoms of their current crisis, the foreclosure. The repossessed car, Chloe's unhappiness, but not on the disease itself. Their learned helplessness and profound disrespect. The most manipulative line was, "Please don't punish her because of our mistakes." It was a classic tactic, using the child as a human shield for her own and Mark's failures. But Chloe wasn't just an innocent bystander. She was a 14-year-old girl who had delivered the most cutting remark of all, with a snort of contempt. She was a product of their toxic parenting, yes, but she was also a participant, and the consequences she was facing attending a public school, not having the latest phone were not punishments. They were simply the natural state of a life, no longer being artificially inflated by someone else's wealth. It wasn't cruelty, it was reality. The final plea, "We can be a family again," a real one this time, was the most insidious part. It dangled the one thing I had always wanted, the thing I had paid so dearly for. But I now understood that a real family couldn't be built on a foundation of financial transactions. A real family couldn't be born from a bailout. They didn't want to fix the family. They wanted to fix their cash flow. That evening, I sat at the small wooden desk in my rented cottage, the sound of the ocean a steady companion outside my window. I opened my laptop and began to type. I kept my response short, clear, and devoid of emotion. I would not offer anger for them to fight against, nor sadness for them to manipulate. I would only offer clarity. Subject, I'm so sorry, Laura. Thank you for your email. I have read it carefully. I accept your apology for what was said at the restaurant. But the issue is not a single incident. It is the result of a dynamic that has been in place for more than a decade or years. I confused financial support with love and familial duty. I see now that was my mistake. I enabled a situation that was unhealthy for all of us. My decision to end all financial support is not a punishment. It is a permanent boundary. It is not open for negotiation, and it will not change. I am not doing this to you. I am doing this for me. My well-being requires me to step away from the role I was playing. You, Mark, and Chloe are capable people. I know that facing these challenges is difficult, but I am confident that you will find a way to stand on your own 2 feet. In fact, I believe it is the only way for you to build a truly independent and fulfilling life. I will not stand in the way of that opportunity for you. This will be my final communication on the matter. I will not be responding to further emails or calls. I wish you the best, and I truly hope you find the happiness and stability you are looking for. Goodbye, Daniel. I read it over and over, checking every word. It was firm, but not cruel. It was final, but not hateful. It offered no hooks for argument, no cracks for guilt to seep through. The sentence, "I am not doing this to you, I am doing this for me," was the heart of it. It reframed the entire narrative. I was no longer the villain who had taken something away from them. I was simply a man reclaiming his own life. I hit send. A wave of profound relief washed over me. It felt like the last chain had been broken. There was no more ambiguity, no more hope for them to cling to that things might go back to the way they were. I had closed the door and turned the key. As predicted, my phone buzzed within minutes. A text from Laura. "Laura, I don't understand. After all this time, how can you be so cold?" Then another. "Laura, this isn't a boundary, it's abandonment. You are abandoning your family." A call came through from Mark. I let it ring. He didn't leave a voicemail, but a text followed immediately. "Mark, read your little email. You're a coward hiding behind your keyboard. You'll regret this. You'll end up old and alone, and we won't be there for you." His threat was laughable. Being there for me was something they had never done. His words only served to cement the wisdom of my decision. I powered off my phone. I didn't need to see any more. The conversation was over. The confrontation had happened, not with yelling and screaming in a living room, but with the quiet, devastating finality of a few hundred well-chosen words sent across the internet. It was a confrontation fit for the modern age, and for the detached, transactional relationship we'd had, I walked out of the cottage and down to the beach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. I stood at the edge of the water, letting the cool foam rush over my bare feet. I had no idea what my future held, where I would live, or what I would do. All I knew was that I was no longer defined by my bank balance or by my role in someone else's life. I was just Daniel, and for the first time, that felt like more than enough. 6 months passed. The silence that had initially felt so vast and empty had transformed into a canvas. I decided not to return to my old house, the one that felt more like a museum of my past loneliness than a home. I sold it, along with most of the formal, stuffy furniture inside. I put a few sentimental items in storage photos of my parents, the old books I'd collected, and embraced a life of intentional simplicity. I spent those months traveling, not to the fancy resorts I used to send my sister's family to, but to quiet, unassuming places. I hiked a section of the Appalachian Trail, sleeping in rustic shelters and sharing stories with strangers around a campfire. I rented a small apartment in New Orleans for a month, learning to appreciate jazz and the slow, humid pace of life. I visited my old friend Peter in Colorado, and we spent a week brainstorming new ideas. The creative spark, I thought, had been extinguished long ago, flickering back to life. In all that time, I had no contact with Laura, Mark, or Chloe. I had upheld my promise. Their numbers remained blocked. My email filters ensured any messages from them went directly to a junk folder I never opened. It wasn't about punishing them with silence. It was about protecting my own peace. The world they inhabited, with its manufactured crises and constant demands, was no longer my concern. One day, out of a sense of detached curiosity, I did a little digging. It wasn't hard to find information. Public records showed that their house had indeed been foreclosed on and sold at auction. A quick search on social media, using an anonymous profile, painted the rest of the picture. Mark's profile, once filled with photos of him on golf courses and holding cocktails on a beach, now listed his job as a salesman at a big-box electronics store. It was the first real job he'd held. In over a decade, Laura's profile showed she was working full-time at a local dental clinic, a step up from her part-time receptionist gig. Her posts were less about luxury and more about simple things. A picture of a sunset, a quote about resilience, a photo of a small, unappetizing-looking casserole with the caption, "Learning to cook on a budget." There was a photo of them standing in front of what was clearly a small, modest apartment building. They were smiling, but it looked like a different kind of smile, less smug, more tired. Chloe's public profile was mostly gone. The flashy, brand-obsessed persona had vanished. Her profile picture was just a generic cartoon avatar. It seemed the life of an online influencer was harder to maintain without an unlimited budget. Seeing all this, I didn't feel a shred of triumph or pleasure. There was no "I told you so" moment. What I felt was a profound sense of neutrality, tinged with a distant, melancholy sadness. Their lives had been drastically, painfully downsized. They were being forced to learn the lessons of self-reliance and budgeting in their 40s, lessons most people learn in their 20s. It was a harsh education, and I didn't envy them. But I also knew, with every fiber of my being, that my intervention had been the only way it could have ever happened. My money had been a dam holding back the natural river of consequences. I hadn't caused the flood. I had just removed the dam. My own life, in contrast, was expanding. Free from the constant financial and emotional drain, I felt lighter and more open to the world. During my stay in Colorado, Peter and I had developed an idea for a small, nonprofit foundation that would provide tech education and resources to underprivileged kids in rural areas. It was a project that required my money, yes, but it also required my expertise, my time, and my passion. It was a role I was choosing, not one that was assigned to me. It felt meaningful in a way that buying a designer handbag never could. Eventually settled in a small town in the mountains, not far from where my new foundation would be based. I bought a modest house with a large garden and a workshop. My life was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. It was filled with purpose. I often think about that night at the restaurant. I think about Chloe's snort, Mark's laugh, and the cold, clear sip of water that changed everything. That moment was a gift. It was a harsh, painful gift, wrapped in cruelty and tied with a ribbon of disrespect, but it was a gift nonetheless. It woke me up from a long, expensive dream and set me on the path to a life that was authentically my own. They thought they were defining my role, but all they did was hand me my release papers. I walked off the set, and for the first time, I am writing my own script to anyone listening who might feel trapped in a role someone else has written for them, whether it's the peacekeeper, the problem solver, or the provider. Know that you have the power to quit. The applause you get for playing a part you hate is not worth the price of your own soul. True family, true love, is not a transaction. It does not keep a ledger. It shows up, not just with its handout. My hope for Laura, Mark, and Chloe is that one day they learn this. My hope for myself is that I never forget it. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.